Live streaming is on.
Cool. All right. So the proposal here is to update the previous policy on policy tracking. And technically it's policy keeping and policy tracking. To have everyone choose a number between 0 and 9 that represents where we are in the policy implementation spectrum. I think it's not necessarily everyone have policy keepers, right? So it's all about the position. The policy keeper position would choose a number between 0 and 9 of where we are in policy implementation spectrum, with 5 being the middle or expected average. So I created an automated reminder example here. So please represent our team's current status and following policies in a number between 0 and 9, with 5 being the middle or expected, and above 5 being that we're following policies really well, and below 5 would be that we are not following policies. Afterwards, you can list specific policies or policy tracking that needs to be done. So before, we would only list, and it was too much. We were just not able to keep up with it. It's not fun. You're like, going after people or telling people, that they have problems and all this stuff. And it was always very specific, and it was always a process, right? Whereas this is a lot more lighter, where we can just take all of the policies in general and average all of the policies that we interpret into a single number. In this case, 5 being the average.
Right, but there's no. When should this happen? Every week or every?
No, it's every single interval, right? So update previous policy and policy track to have everyone choose a number. On the details, it says that.
What do you mean by interval?
The time interval. So the second detail, which is 125, primarily assigned to policy keeper positions at every time interval of the organization planning model. So examples of time intervals, this is line 129, would be, for example, topics. Then you've got our 30-minute break segments, right? Break segments. You've got sessions, right? You've got octants. You've got a half day, you've got a day, you've got a half week, you've got weekly, 2 weeks, monthly, quarterly, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Yearly, every 2 years, every 5 years. Even the Jupyter session that we missed, we could do policy tracking on, a policy spectrum on, So we're policy keepers of the organization are supposed to be requested by, ideally we'll create automated reminders that, for example, every single day we send out a reminder to all the policy keepers to say, look, you need to give a number between 0 and 9 on how we are doing on following our policies in the last day, right? And then every week it would be, okay, looking back over the last 7 days, how's the policy been? How have we been doing on following policies, right? So again, it can be just like this average general number that represents potentially dozens, if not hundreds, of different policies all into a single number. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is something that we need to decide. So if we want to have it daily or every.
No, it's all of them. Like the current, if you pull up the current policy on policy tracking, it already has all of the intervals, or all of the intervals are required.
Right.
Right. But again, all the intervals are included. What's not required is that this policy does not create any sort of upfront pay stop or hard stop or anything like that. This all feeds into the evaluation system, and that basically, and it's also part of our training system. So we do training with policy keeping and policy tracking, right? So by failing to do policy keeping and policy tracking, we don't train people, right? Because if you just ignore all our policies, you're never going to learn and get the training
to learn them
to function in the organization. So it's very important to follow the policies, and then more importantly, when you're not following the policies, to be told you're not following the policies, both as an individual and as a team, so that we can learn, and because it's part of our training process, right? So it's good to note policy keeping is part of our evaluation and training process. Okay.
Right.
Very important.
But so this is something that only the policy keeper should give this number, or everybody?
Well, just policy keepers, really. Because if you don't know a policy, there's not much you can do here, right? So it's people who know policy, but everyone is, anyone can be a policy keeper, right? So the other way to think about it is that as a team, if we are required to do policy keeping on a daily basis, right? Let's just think about this session, right? So at this session, at the end of the session, we spent a couple hours, right? And then at the end of the session, somebody is supposed to be the policy keeper. So we should be assigning the policy keeper role at the beginning. We typically skip that, and that should reflect on our policy, right? So what we say is that somebody is required to do the policy keeping at the session, or there's policy tracking for everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. We should go back in doing the positions clearly and have the policy keeping.
Yeah, but the difference between policy keeping for the session with the position and the policy keeping for the organization on a whole is that policy keeping applies not just to every session, it also applies to the entire day and the half week and the week and the fortnight and the month and the quarter and the half year and the year, right? There's policies that don't happen within a session, right? So the longer the time interval, the more policies that are applicable. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
there's some policies that only come up once or twice a year.
Yeah.
Depending on the policy is. So again, this is a team policy. Somebody in the team is required to do all of these trackings. Otherwise, it's policy tracking for the entire team.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, it's we don't have a good model for exactly how to require the policy keeping and the policy tracking, but this is starting to get us in the right direction where we can simplify everything to a 5-second process. Like, let's say we are doing policy tracking on the current segment, which is the 30 minutes, right? I could say, okay, Jay, and I'm doing policy tracking, and I'm going to give it, currently we're at about a 4. Right, and I could note here, we're not doing stretches. Notes
breath and pauses.
Great, no breath. So it's like, are we really bad on our policies right now? No, but we're, technically we're not following all of our policies. We do have the recording going on, which is great. So maybe I get a 4.25, right? So that took me like 15 seconds. Yes. And that would be policy keeping for this current segment. And then the way this would change, if you look at policy keeping for the whole session, you come to the policy keeping section, and we want to change this policy keeping section to be much simpler. So I'm going to go to line 15 here on the policy keeping tab, and it would be, the first section would be the name of person. And then you could say your number from 0 to 9, right? Then examples of policy tracking, and then you could have examples of policies we are following, right? Of following policies or policy stars. So you could basically break the whole thing down into just 4 columns. So each person just does a column. So before it was much more complicated. It was like, okay, what was the policy what is the category of the policy, what is the policy being tracked in the description, how much time, bonus, minimum, and who does it apply to. It's very specific, very exact, individual policies. Whereas this new model, I can just be like, okay, this session went, remember, so there's 3, this would create the 3rd number, right? So going back to our notes, so every session would get 3 numbers. So every session gets 3 numbers, and everyone is encouraged to do them, but obviously policy keeping is not required for everyone, right? So the first number is part of the intro, and it's how are you feeling from 0 to 9. The second number is the the exit or the checkouts, right? So check-ins, checkouts. And that number is how did the session go for you from 0 to 9, right? And then the third number is going to be the policy keeping, and that is how did the team do in following policies from 0 to 9, right? With 5 being the middle or expected. Okay. Does that make sense? So if I was doing that at the end of the session, I would just go to policy keeping. I would put my name on line 16. I would say, okay, overall for the session, we're like 3.75, and that's all I would have to do, right? And then as we were tracking our policies, we could see if there was kept going lower and lower and lower. We would need to be okay. We're down to a 2. This is really bad. We need to stop and prioritize resetting our policies, right? And if I wanted to, I could give examples, but it literally takes like 3 seconds to put my name and a number of how we're doing on following policy. And examples of policy tracking, examples of what we're doing obviously recordings, which was great, and policies that we're not following, I could list here. You know?
Yeah, but Jay, so the policy keeping, these are 2 different things, because the policy keeping that we were doing before, which was the responsibility of whoever took on the position of the policy keeper, was to track all the policies that have been broken during the session, and then after the session, so communicate to the people that broke the policies, and make sure that they do policy tracking within 24 hours.
Yeah, but we don't do that, right? So
no. But it's 2 different things.
Yes, but this doesn't replace the other thing. This simply creates a 5-second version. So the 5-second version is basically, okay, if we followed most of the policies and got some policies that are good and some policies that are bad, in general, we could say we're a 5. So if I was just like looking at this, like, okay, just in general, maybe we are like a 4.6 or a 4.6.
Yeah, but here there's no requirement to do policy tracking. You just state
we already
your
that's already part of the existing policy. We don't need to readdress that.
Yeah, I mean, so this is 2 different things. So this is your feeling on your personal feeling on how the policies.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's a review, but the point is that it doesn't trigger any policy tracking, because what makes you learn the policies is by breaking them and doing a policy tracking.
Yes.
Right? So if you're not required to do it.
Yeah. So correct. This is not about policy, specifically policy tracking. This is about policy keeping, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that it should be required. Otherwise, you do policy tracking for not doing this review, because this.
This become part of our policy. If we don't do it, we have to do policy tracking for not doing.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So everybody in this session, at least for this session, is required to do this, to give this.
No. So the reason why we're not requiring everyone to do it is because it's like voting. It's like if you don't know the policies and you don't have the information, you're not a policy keeper. Only the policy keeper is required to do it. What is required is this last line, 131. Anyone can do the policy keeping. And we require someone from the team to do policy keeping per session and interval. Otherwise, there's policy keeping for the entire team. So the whole team is required to assign a policy keeper, not just per session, but also overall for the team and all the different intervals. So as long as somebody once a week does the policy keeping for the organization, we all are in alignment with the policies. But if nobody does it, then we all have broken the policy. Do you get it what I'm saying?
Yeah, somebody must do it.
And the minimum amount of work that's required to do is literally 5 seconds. Just choosing a number from 0 to 9 for how we are doing and following our policies. If the number is a 5 or a 4 or even a 3.5 or whatever, it's like, okay, we are hanging in there. We're following most of the policies. But as soon as you start putting a 2, and there's obviously a flag going on, that's going to raise a flag in a very easy way where we're questions, and we're going to be like, hey, what are the policies not being followed? We need to take the time. We need to prioritize this in evaluation. We need to prioritize this in sessions, and really dive down. Like when we really aren't following policies, we need to address it. But if we're a 5, if we're a 4, yes, a policy wasn't tracked, it wasn't followed correctly, but it's not a big deal. You know what I mean? But when we hit like a 1, like if I'm like a 1, it's like, okay, these are the policies that are not being followed, and this needs to be escalated, and everyone needs to do policy tracking because we're in a bad situation. This gives us a spectrum to be able to gauge how serious the policies are that we're not following or following. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think it's a bit complicated.
But it's not complicated. It's just saying from 0 to 9, give a number for how we're doing and following our policies. How is that complicated? It takes literally 5 seconds. It's only complicated if you think this is replacing any of our previous policy tracking systems, which it doesn't, right? All of our existing policy tracking and policy keeping systems, all those policies still exist. We just don't do them because those ones are too complicated. They take too much time, and we're not doing them. What this is going to do is going to create a really simple 5-second per interval. So every week we spend 5 seconds. Every session we spend 5 seconds. Every day we spend 5 seconds, right? Every month we spend 5 seconds, right? And then if that number is like a 1 or a 2, right? Or a 3, a low 3, now instead of 5 seconds, we're going to know we need to go back through and understand why is that number so low. And then we go into all the other policies and make sure we're doing full policy tracking and get into it, addressing the situation, addressing what the issues are. But if we don't even know that we're at a 1 or 2 or a low 3, we're not going to do that. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I see what you're saying, and it's a great
keeping status update that's required to be done at every interval so that the team knows where we are in our policies. Are we a 5? Are we basically middle of the line? Or are we doing good on our policies? Or are we starting to really fall behind? Like last week, I would say we're a 1 or a 2. And we're stepping it up and we're trying to improve.
No, I get it, but I mean, what I think it's complicated is to understand how so with this separation between the policy keepers and everything. So, in my opinion, it's a great thing, but it should be something that we set very clearly. For example, this is required to be done at every session, at every segment, at every week, every 3 days, or every day, or every month. I don't know, but very specific intervals. So
okay, but what does it mean if we don't do it?
Okay. And it should be required.
That's what policies are. It's already required to be done because it's a policy. That's what a policy is. So my question is, what do you mean by it being required? Do you mean upfront pay stop? Like, what do you mean?
No, policy tracking.
Okay, but that's already automatic. That's the whole point of a policy, is that if you don't follow the policy, it's automatic policy tracking. That's what policies are for.
Yeah, but it's only for the policy keepers.
Like you don't need to. There's no point in saying that a policy is required, because that's what a policy is that it's required. Like that's the point of a policy.
Yeah, correct. But I'm saying everybody should be required to do it. maybe at the checkouts or at the wrap up or.
But why would we have everybody do it if, like, and I have no problem with this. Like there's two options. So option number one is that policy, the team is responsible for the new policy spectrum, right? Each interval, and can assign and are required to assign at least one person as the policy keeper to meet policy, right? Whereas option two would be everyone is required to do policy keeping spectrum, right? I'm perfectly fine with everyone being required to do it. I'm just saying I don't know if that's necessary, especially if you don't know the policies. Right. So for example, for me, the most important part of policy keeping, like if you go to policy keeping section again, so lines 15 and 16, right? So let's say you had 3 policy keepers or 3 people who feel good about the policies. So you got Jay, Alberto, and Joyce, right? And you know, Alberto gives a 3, I give a 4.65, and Joyce gives a 6, right? That would average out to a 4.55, right? But what if you have, and I'm going to go back to the notes again, you know, what if you have on your team, let's say you have 50 people on the team, because we hired a bunch of people and we're expanding and we're growing, and we have people all over the world, and we're doing like a daily, no, let's say we're doing a weekly policy tracking, right? Or policy keeping, weekly policy keeping. And, you know, you have people like Alberto, Joyce, and Jay, and we're like, oh my God, we're not following policies. We're all like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, right? And then the other 47 people who are brand new all say, oh, it's great, it's an 8, right? Then the average is basically 7.5, right? It's like, how does this make sense that 47 people who don't know the policies are all giving it an 8, and the average comes out to a 7.5 when we know we're not following the policies? It doesn't make sense for people who don't know the policies to be able to control the average number of the actual policies. Like, the policy keeper is an assigned person responsible who is reviewing the policies and making sure that their number that they're giving on behalf of the team is a correct number based on their knowledge of the policies. Otherwise, it's a pointless number. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, now I get it. Yeah, it makes perfectly sense.
Because what I want the average. I want to very, very quickly be able to take a gauge of potentially, like if we do this every quarter, every year, right? It could be hundreds and hundreds of policies in relationship to the entire organization or network or even beyond. And you're just very, very quickly seeing where we line up through a quick average, you know, where one person would have no ability to even think about all those policies. But when you get 10, 20, 50 people all together quickly thinking about all the policies they've seen over the last year, the data that you're getting could be extremely valuable. But only if the people know what the policies are.
Of course, yeah.
And it can be done in 5 seconds. And that's what's so valuable and beautiful about this policy, is that instead of creating a system that literally takes, you know, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour, even potentially 3, 4, 5 hours per month or year, right? This takes 5 seconds and is fully scalable to literally thousands of policy keepers all across the world, right? So it's fully scalable to whether you have one policy keeper or thousands of policy keepers, and it can still happen within 5 seconds.
Yeah, okay. I get it now.
Yeah. So are we going for option 1 here for line 150? Or do you want to do option 2? Do you want to vote on it?
Yeah, option 1.
Okay, option 1. Right. So unless anyone has any objections, the idea is that this would be a policy keeping proposal, and that the requirement is that, you know, anyone could do the policy keeping. Like, anyone's invited to do policy. If you want to do policy keeping, nobody can stop you from doing it, right? but that we as a team are required to assign at least one policy keeper for every interval. Okay.
Yeah.
Another good interval, which I think is really the half-day interval is a really good interval, because the half-day interval creates 2 half days where you get the old world and the new world. So every half day, for example, every day at the end of Sonic, somebody would be responsible for reviewing the Hydra, Andromeda, Cobalt, and then Sonic, and it'd be like, okay, for this half day, how do we do in following the policies? And then it's basically, okay, boom, check. The new world has done its policy keeping review, and this is our number, right? We're a 5, or we're a 4, or whatever, or we're a 6. And then the old world would do the same thing at the end of Zuri. Basically, okay, for Phoenix, and right now maybe there's nothing going on in old world, it's not a big deal, but eventually our goal is getting the old world octants fully functional, just like the new world. And then every old world, every single day, it would be a half-day review on the old world octants as well, right? And then you would have the full day review in general for both. Okay.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it would go to the half week. So the half week would be every 3 days. We would evaluate all of the policy keeping for the last 3 days. And there's very different policies based on the policies for a single session versus the policies for every single day versus the policies for every single week. So as you go up in the intervals, you are considering all of the policies for each individual session and all the policies for each individual day and week and everything. So it's just more and more policies accumulate.
Perfect. So, talk about policy. We should take a break.
Well, let's vote on this, right? Can we vote on this?
Yeah, I'm ready to vote.
Okay. So, are there any other questions about the proposal to implement to update the previous policy and policies to have everyone choose a number between, or not everyone? How did that go back? To have the policy keeper choose a number, or let's say policy keepers choose a number between 0 and 9 that represents where we are in the policy implementation quote spectrum, with 5 being the middle or expected average for following policies. Okay. Are there any questions about the proposal?
No more questions. No.
And if you want, I can put in the proposal that the team is required to assign at least one policy keeper, right?
I put in the details.
Okay, assign the detail? Okay. All right, so if there's no more questions, are there any concerns? Okay, no concerns. Are there any objections?
No objections. No.
Okay, so we have consensus on this. So just to make sure it's clear, my intention of creating this proposal is not to fix our policy keeping models. Like, we still have lots of problems with policy keeping, policy tracking, following policies, understanding policy. There's plenty of problems there. The purpose, and there is a bunch of things within Sensei that are there to help with that, but the purpose of this policy is simply to create a much simpler and easier thing that can happen in as little as 5 seconds or less, so that we can start doing something that's fun and we can issue value for that. Oh, every time you do policy keeping, you get value, and it becomes fun and engaging because it's so quick and easy. And then you can easily show other people how to do it and how it can actually be fun to look at a list of policies, evaluate for whatever interval you're looking at, and then give a quick number. It's easy, it's simple, it's fun, you get value for it, like woohoo, So I'm excited about this. I think it'll really help us create a better system. It doesn't solve the problems, but it will help us with a new tool. Okay.
All right.
To get us started. Awesome. So we're ready for a break?
Yeah, 5-minute break.
Awesome. And then a view up, or do you want to do the view up now?
No, we need to take the break first.
Okay, so let's take a break and 5 minutes. Yeah.